Rachel Morgan stood by the large window of her penthouse apartment in Austin, Texas, looking out at the city below. Austin's skyline stretched out before her, its lights twinkling like distant stars. The city, alive with opportunities, seemed to pulse with a constant hum of ambition. The streets were filled with young professionals, college students, tech entrepreneurs, people who shared her drive, her hunger for success. Yet, here she was, standing still, trapped in a moment that felt like it was frozen in time. It was the night before her wedding. The wedding she had dreamed about for so long. The one she had spent months meticulously planning with Luke. Yet, the joy of the occasion felt distant, as if the weight of something much heavier had descended upon her heart. As she held the wedding invitation in her hands, the elegant gold lettering stark against the white card, the words blurred before her eyes. The invitation was beautiful, a symbol of everything she had worked for: success, independence, love. But it also represented the absence of the one thing she had never been able to achieve: a truly loving family. Will they even show up? She wondered, staring at the card in her hand. Her heart clenched at the thought of her parents' disinterest in her life. Her father's face flashed in her mind, that expression of cold indifference when he had refused to attend her high school graduation, her college graduation, and even her promotion party at her first job in Wall Street. Her mother had never been much better, always placing her pride and love on her older sister, Samantha, leaving Rachel to fend for herself. Flashback, childhood memories. Rachel's earliest memories of family were tainted with a feeling of neglect. Samantha, her older sister by 11 months, was the family's golden child. Beautiful, charming, and always at the center of attention, Samantha was everything that Rachel wasn't. While Rachel was reserved, intelligent, and introspective, Samantha was outgoing, popular, and effortlessly perfect in their parents' eyes. Rachel, on the other hand, felt like a mere afterthought, a shadow trailing behind the golden sister who could do no wrong. From a young age, she had learned to accept the role of the quiet, obedient child, never the center of attention, never the one who received the praise. Their family photos told the story well. In every picture, Samantha was the focal point, positioned squarely in the middle, her radiant smile dominating the frame, while Rachel was often relegated to the outer edges, a distant figure, as though she were an afterthought. In the family vacations that seemed to revolve around Samantha's every wish and whim, Rachel was always left behind, spending time with her grandparents in the small town of Waco, Texas. The Disneyland incident: when Rachel was 7, she overheard her parents making plans for a trip to Disneyland. She could still remember the excitement that coursed through her as she imagined walking through the gates, seeing Mickey Mouse, and riding the roller coasters. But her hopes were quickly dashed when her mother casually mentioned that the trip would only involve Samantha. "Sorry, Rachel," her mother said without a hint of remorse. "We're only taking Samantha this time. You'll get your turn next year?" Rachel had stood frozen, her heart sinking to her stomach. The empty promise of next time only deepened the wound, as that next time never came. She spent that summer alone, staring out the window of her grandparents' house, feeling the sting of abandonment. Her grandparents, Henry and June Taylor, tried to comfort her, but no amount of warm hugs or kind words could fill the void left by her parents' neglect. At night, when the stars were clear in the sky, Henry would take her up to the rooftop to look through his old brass telescope. "When you look at the stars," he would say softly, "you realize how small our problems really are. This too shall pass, Rachel." The unseen pain. As Rachel grew older, the unfairness of her situation became harder to ignore. By the time she reached middle school, the emotional neglect she had suffered from her parents was no longer something she could overlook. The anger she felt toward her sister, Samantha, began to simmer beneath the surface. Samantha seemed to effortlessly walk through life, basking in the glow of parental affection, while Rachel was relegated to the background. One afternoon, as she walked home from school, Rachel overheard a group of her classmates gossiping about her. "Did you see Rachel at school today?" one girl sneered. "She was reading in the corner by herself again." Rachel tried to ignore them, but it was impossible to escape the biting words. She was the quiet, shy girl who never seemed to fit in. She wasn't like Samantha, who was surrounded by friends, always invited to parties, and constantly admired for her beauty and charisma. The truth was, Rachel had always been different, and that difference was something that her parents, despite their many accomplishments, never seemed to understand. "Why can't you be more like Samantha?" her father would often say. "She's always the one people gravitate toward. You should learn from her." Rachel's refuge, the grandparents. The only refuge Rachel ever had was her grandparents, Henry and June. When the sting of being overlooked by her parents became too much to bear, she would escape to their house in Waco, a place where she could feel loved and accepted for who she was. They never compared her to Samantha. They never made her feel small or insignificant. Henry, a retired engineer, spent hours with her, teaching her about science, philosophy, and the wonders of the universe. He had a way of making her feel like she mattered. June, on the other hand, was a soft, warm presence, always ready with a hug and a piece of her homemade apple pie. One evening, as Rachel sat with her grandfather, Henry turned to her with a serious look in his eyes. "Rachel," he said, his voice calm but firm, "never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You have the power to create your own path. Knowledge is the key to your freedom." Those words stayed with Rachel for the rest of her life. They were the foundation on which she built her resilience, the reminder that she wasn't defined by her family's rejection, but by the strength she found in herself. The last straw, a life of striving. Rachel's journey through high school and college was marked by a determination to prove herself. She excelled academically, earning the top spot in every class she took, and was eventually awarded a scholarship to Stanford University. Yet, even as she climbed the ladder of success, the pain of her family's neglect never truly left her. Every achievement felt hollow without their support. At Stanford, Rachel met Luke Anderson, a quiet law student with a passion for social justice. They bonded over long nights spent discussing everything from politics to philosophy, and before long, they were inseparable. Luke became her rock, the person who believed in her when no one else did. The wedding invitation on standing there in her apartment, Rachel's mind wandered back to the present. The wedding invitation was a symbol of everything she had worked for, everything she had built. She had a career she was proud of, a fiancé who loved her, and a future that seemed bright. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. She thought about her parents, about the way they had always been more interested in Samantha's life than in hers. And despite all her success, the lingering question remained, would they even show up to her wedding? Rachel turned toward the mirror, looking at her reflection. For the first time in years, she saw someone who was confident, someone who had fought to get where she was. But the ache of not being truly loved by the people who should have cared for her the most still lingered. Rachel sat at her desk, her laptop open in front of her, but her eyes were distant. The cursor blinked on the screen, but her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the mess of emotions that her wedding had stirred up. The past few days had been a blur. Interviews, phone calls, meetings. But none of it could distract her from the anxiety gnawing at her. She glanced at her phone again, willing a message to appear from her parents, or Samantha, just to hear something, anything that might give her the illusion that they cared. But as always, there was nothing. Her thumb hovered over the screen, ready to make the call that she knew would lead nowhere. But before she could hit the call button, there was a knock at the door. "Hey, you busy?" Luke's voice was warm, familiar. He opened the door just enough to peek his head through. "I was just making sure you're okay. You've been a little quiet tonight." Rachel forced a smile. "Just thinking," she said, her voice betraying the weariness she had been hiding. "I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind with the wedding coming up." She looked down at the invitation again, its sharp, clean edges mocking her sense of calm. Luke stepped into the room, his gentle presence filling the space. He was tall, his frame broad yet soft, in a way that made Rachel feel safe, protected. He sat down beside her, his hand finding hers. "I know this wedding is supposed to be the happiest day of your life," he said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "But I can see something's bothering you. It's more than just nerves about the ceremony, right?" Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather the strength to talk about what had been eating at her for so long. "It's my family," she finally admitted, her voice quiet. "I don't know if they'll even come. They never really showed up for me before. Why would they show up now?" Luke squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Maybe they'll surprise you. People can change, Rachel. You're building a life for yourself, with or without them." Rachel turned to look at him, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I want to believe that. I really do." Flashback, Samantha, the chosen one. Rachel's memories of growing up in Houston were filled with bitterness and longing. Samantha, her older sister, had always been the golden child. It wasn't just that Samantha was popular, charming, and effortlessly beautiful. It was that she was the one their parents always praised. Rachel was the responsible, obedient daughter, the one who stayed quiet and did everything right, but never seemed to be the one anyone noticed. As they grew older, the gap between them only seemed to widen. Rachel worked hard at school, excelling in subjects that no one seemed to care about, while Samantha coasted through life, getting all the attention without even trying. And no one seemed to notice Rachel's accomplishments. It was always about Samantha's latest achievement, whether it was winning a beauty pageant, making captain of the cheerleading squad, or, more recently, being promoted to the youngest VP at the company she worked for. It wasn't that Rachel disliked her sister. It was just hard to watch her get everything she wanted, while Rachel's success was barely acknowledged. One evening, after Samantha's promotion was announced, Rachel had overheard her parents talking in the kitchen. Samantha was sitting at the counter, smiling brightly, her phone buzzing with congratulatory messages. "Did you hear about Samantha?" her mother said, her voice filled with pride. "She's going to be a VP at just 26. We've always known she'd be the one to make it big." Rachel was sitting in the living room, pretending to read, but she couldn't help but overhear. Her heart twisted with a mix of resentment and envy. She had worked so hard, too. But no one seemed to care. No one seemed to see her. Later that evening, when Rachel and Samantha were alone in the hallway, Rachel tried to make small talk. "I heard about your promotion. That's amazing," Rachel said, forcing a smile. Samantha didn't even look at her. "Yeah, well, it's just what happens when you have the right connections and the right look," she replied, not even bothering to sound humble. Rachel's stomach churned. She wanted to say something, wanted to shout that she had worked harder than anyone, that her worth didn't come from her appearance or popularity. But instead, she simply nodded and walked away. A confrontation with her father, as Rachel sat by the window, lost in thought, a memory of her father's cold words flashed through her mind. It was from the year she graduated from college, a day that should have been full of celebration, but instead was marred by her father's indifference. Rachel had graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in finance, a major accomplishment that she had worked tirelessly for. Her grandparents were there, proud and beaming, but her parents, they hadn't even bothered to show up. When Rachel finally confronted her father, the conversation had gone like this. "Why weren't you there, Dad?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling with frustration. "It was my graduation. I needed you." Greg Morgan, her father, had simply shrugged. "You've always been the smart one, Rachel. You didn't need anyone's validation. Samantha needed our support more. You're fine. You always have been." That was the moment Rachel had realized. She didn't matter to them. She was just the quiet, responsible one, the one who didn't need attention. She wasn't the one they had dreamed of or hoped for. Rachel's escape and new hope. Rachel had long ago accepted that her parents' love was conditional, and that Samantha would always be their focus. But what had hurt the most was realizing that her family didn't even seem to recognize her achievements. Her accomplishments felt like they were always overshadowed by Samantha's. But that was all in the past now. Rachel had found a new sense of purpose in her career, And most importantly, in Luke, he was everything her family wasn't: supportive, understanding, and willing to love her for who she was, not for what she could do or what role she played in a family that would never truly accept her. Maybe it's time I stop waiting for their approval, Rachel said, more to herself than to Luke. I've spent too many years trying to get something from them that they aren't willing to give. Maybe I don't need it anymore. Luke nodded, his hand gently resting on hers. You don't need them, Rachel. You have everything you need right here with me, and we're going to build the life you deserve. Rachel looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. Maybe Luke was right. Maybe she didn't need her family's approval. Maybe it was time to start living for herself. The invitation. A final effort, Rachel took a deep breath, glancing at her phone again. She had typed out a message to her parents a dozen times already, but the words never seemed to feel right. She needed them to know about her wedding, but more importantly, she needed them to know that she had made it without them, that she was fine on her own. After a long pause, Rachel finally hit send. The message was simple, almost cold, but honest. Mom, Dad, Samantha, just wanted to let you know that Luke and I are getting married next month. Our wedding is on the 15th. You're welcome to attend. She sat back, waiting for the response. Would they even acknowledge it? Would they even care? Rachel had no idea. Rachel sat alone in her apartment, the silence around her amplifying the chaos in her mind. It had been days since she sent the invitation to her parents, and she had yet to receive a response. She had expected it, no matter how many times she tried to tell herself otherwise, but the emptiness she felt still cut deep. She had long ago stopped expecting love from them, but the lingering ache of not being good enough still gnawed at her. Luke had been her constant support, but even his reassuring words couldn't quiet the voice in her head that said she would never be able to escape the shadow of her family's indifference. She picked up her phone and glanced at the message one more time. Mom, Dad, Samantha, just wanted to let you know that Luke and I are getting married next month. Our wedding is on the 15th. You're welcome to attend. It was cold, simple, but it was all she could muster. She had made the decision to reach out, but even now, she felt a sense of dread about what would come next. The message still sat unread. Rachel exhaled sharply and placed the phone down on the coffee table, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't know what she had expected from them. Perhaps a glimmer of interest, some sign that they still cared. But even that seemed out of reach. Just as she leaned back into the couch, lost in thought, the doorbell rang. Rachel looked up, startled. She wasn't expecting anyone, except for maybe Luke, but he would text her before he came over. She stood up slowly, hesitant but curious, and walked toward the door. She peeked through the peephole, her heart skipping a beat when she saw a familiar face. It was Samantha. Samantha's unexpected arrival. Rachel opened the door, and there stood her sister, Samantha, dressed in a sharp, expensive coat, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and a large bag slung over her shoulder. Despite the years of tension between them, there was a moment of silence as the two women locked eyes. Samantha looked at Rachel with a mixture of hesitation and something else. Was it guilt? Hey, Samantha said softly, stepping into the doorway. I, figured we should talk. Rachel's heart raced. She didn't know how to feel: surprised, angry, confused. After all these years, Samantha had never reached out to her. But here she was, standing in front of her, as if nothing had happened. I don't really know what to say to you, Sam, Rachel said, her voice tight. Why are you here? Samantha winced slightly, but she stepped inside the apartment anyway, her eyes scanning the modern, minimalist decor. Oh, I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight, Rach, she said, her voice softening, though still holding that same confident tone she always used. But I've been thinking, maybe I owe you an apology for everything, for how things went with Mom and Dad, and for how I treated you growing up. Rachel's stomach twisted. The words felt foreign coming from Samantha's mouth, and it took every ounce of Rachel's willpower not to roll her eyes. She had heard apologies from Samantha before, apologies that were followed by actions that were anything but sincere. "Really?" Rachel asked, her voice rising. "After all these years, now you're deciding to apologize? Where were you when I needed you? Where were you when Mom and Dad made it clear that I didn't matter?" Samantha winced, the words stinging more than Rachel had intended. "I know," she whispered, her head dropping slightly. "I know I've been horrible to you. I've been selfish. I just, I didn't know how to handle everything, and it wasn't fair to you." Rachel took a deep breath, her emotions swirling inside her. "And now you think an apology is enough to make up for everything?" Samantha's eyes were downcast as she nodded, her voice quiet but sincere. "I know it's not enough. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I've been a horrible sister." Rachel's heart wavered. Part of her wanted to push her sister away, to tell her that it was too late, that she had done too much damage. But another part of her, the part that still remembered the little girl who once looked up to her sister, the part that still wanted a family, softened. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Sam," Rachel said, her voice quieter now, the anger fading into something else. "You've hurt me more than I can explain, but hearing you say that, it means something." Samantha nodded, looking relieved, but still deeply regretful. "I don't want to mess this up. I want to be there for you, Rachel. I really do. If you'll let me." A conversation with Luke. Later that evening, as Rachel sat on the balcony with Luke, the cool Texas breeze brushing against her skin, she replayed the conversation with her sister over and over in her mind. It was a start, she supposed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. She didn't know how to bridge the gap that had been growing between them for so long. Luke sat beside her, his hand on hers, his warm presence grounding her. "How do you feel?" he asked gently, watching her closely. Rachel took a deep breath, staring out at the city lights. "I don't know. It's strange. I thought I was done with them, done with all of it. But Sam's apology, it's hard to believe. After everything, I just don't know if I can trust it." Luke nodded, understanding. "I get it. It's a lot to process, Rachel. But remember, forgiveness is a choice. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about freeing yourself from the anger that's holding you back. You don't have to let them control your happiness anymore." Rachel turned to look at him, her eyes searching his for the reassurance she desperately needed. "And what about me? What if I never get the closure I want? What if they never truly change?" Luke gave her a small smile, his thumb gently brushing over her hand. "You can't change them, Rachel. You can only change how you respond. You've worked so hard to get here, to build a life that's yours. Don't let them take that away from you. You're allowed to move forward, even if they're not ready to join you." Rachel squeezed his hand, feeling a flicker of hope. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could move on. Maybe she didn't need them after all. The wedding and a family divided. The day of the wedding arrived with all the elegance and anticipation Rachel had hoped for. The venue was stunning, an upscale hotel ballroom in downtown Austin, adorned with white roses and twinkling fairy lights. Rachel stood in front of the mirror, wearing her pristine white gown, her heart pounding as she prepared to walk down the aisle. She had always imagined this day differently, her parents sitting in the front row, her sister standing by her side. But instead, she was alone in this moment. Her grandparents, of course, were there, their proud smiles more than enough to fill the void. And Luke, who had become her rock, stood waiting for her at the altar, his love and support unwavering. As the doors opened and Rachel began to walk toward Luke, her heart swelled with a bittersweet mix of emotions. She had built a family for herself, and although it wasn't the one she had hoped for, it was one that truly loved and accepted her. It was enough. The ceremony proceeded without a hitch, the vows exchanged with heartfelt sincerity. Rachel and Luke's connection was palpable, and as they kissed, sealing their promise to one another. Rachel knew deep down that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would no longer be bound by her family's rejection. But as the reception unfolded, there was still a lingering ache in Rachel's chest, a subtle, gnawing sensation that her family's absence couldn't fill. She glanced around the room, searching for any sign that they had shown up, even if just to make things right. But the seat that should have been occupied by her parents remained empty. And then, just as the night was winding down, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Samantha, standing there in a glamorous gown, her eyes tired, but filled with something Rachel hadn't seen before: regret. "I couldn't miss this," Samantha said, her voice quiet but sincere. "I left my promotion celebration early. I realized I needed to be here with you." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Maybe there was hope after all. Rachel stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting the delicate lace veil that draped down her back. The hotel suite was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner. The bridal gown was perfect, white satin, fitted at the waist, flowing down to the floor in elegant folds. But as Rachel examined herself, she didn't just see the woman in the mirror. She saw all the years of struggle, of being overlooked, of fighting for her place in a world that had always made her feel less than enough. She had worked hard for everything she had, everything she was about to have: the marriage to Luke, the life they would build together. But standing there in that gown, a familiar ache tugged at her heart. She had spent so many years building a life, a career, and a sense of independence. She had fought for recognition, at work, with her friends, and most of all, from her family. Yet, despite all her accomplishments, there was always a part of her that longed for her parents' love. She had learned to live without it, but that didn't mean the pain didn't still linger, especially today. Luke appeared in the doorway, his calm presence immediately putting her at ease. He was dressed in a sharp tuxedo, his hair neatly combed, a slight smile on his face. He looked at her with admiration, as if he could see through her doubts. "You're stunning," he said softly, stepping toward her. "Are you okay?" Rachel smiled weakly. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. She met his gaze in the mirror, her reflection and his colliding in the glass. "Just thinking." Luke placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his thumb rubbing the fabric of her dress. "It's okay to be nervous. This is a big day, a big step. But we're doing this together." Rachel turned to face him, her eyes searching his for reassurance. I know what this day means to me, to us. But I can't stop thinking about them, about my family. They've always been this invisible weight on my shoulders." Luke nodded, understanding. He had witnessed her inner conflict over the years, seen her push herself to the limits, trying to get their attention, their approval. "You've been carrying that weight for far too long. Today, it's time to let go. This is your life, Rachel. You've already made your family with me, with your grandparents, with the people who truly see you. You don't need them anymore." Rachel swallowed the lump in her throat, the reality of Luke's words sinking in. He was right. For the first time in her life, she didn't need her parents' approval. She had found a love that was unconditional, a love that had never tried to change her. She had found her true family. The wedding ceremony. The moment Rachel stepped into the grand ballroom, her heart skipped a beat. The room was bathed in soft golden light. Tall white candles lined the aisles, and the soft hum of classical music filled the air. Guests were seated, their murmurs quieting as they turned to see her. She walked slowly, her eyes focused on the altar, on Luke. Her grandparents, Henry and June, sat proudly in the front row, beaming with love and pride. They had always been her anchors, the only people who had ever made her feel truly cherished. They had watched her grow, witnessed her struggles, and now they were here, celebrating this new chapter in her life. As Rachel reached the altar, she looked at Luke, who smiled at her with warmth and adoration. She could see it in his eyes, the way he saw her, the way he loved her for who she was, not for what she could achieve. Rachel, the officiant began, his voice calm and steady, we are here today to celebrate the union of two souls, two people who have found love in each other. Rachel, do you take Luke to be your lawfully wedded husband? Rachel's voice was steady as she looked at Luke, her heart swelling with emotion. I do. The officiant turned to Luke. And Luke, do you take Rachel to be your lawfully wedded wife? Luke smiled, his voice full of emotion. I do. Chew, they exchanged vows, each word laced with the promise of a future built on love, trust, and mutual respect. Luke's hands trembled slightly as he placed the ring on Rachel's finger. With this ring, I promise to love you through all the highs and the lows, through the storms and the sunshine. You are my home, Rachel. Rachel's voice broke slightly as she responded. With this ring, I vow to always stand by you, to support you, and to love you with everything I have. I promise to never let go of the love we've built, no matter what comes our way. The first dance and the arrival of Samantha. After the ceremony, the reception began in full swing. The ballroom was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Rachel and Luke had their first dance as husband and wife, the soft strains of a love song playing in the background. Rachel rested her head on Luke's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his embrace, the security of knowing she was finally where she belonged. But just as the night seemed to settle into joy, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Rachel froze. It was Samantha. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Rachel's heart hammered in her chest as her sister walked into the room, her steps measured, her head held high. She was dressed in a stunning gown, her blonde hair perfectly styled, but Rachel could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of something unspoken. Luke noticed the change in Rachel's demeanor and followed her gaze. You okay? He whispered, his hand tightening around hers. Rachel nodded, though her voice was tight. It's her, Samantha. Samantha walked toward Rachel, her eyes meeting hers across the room. The tension was palpable. She had been a no-show for so many years, and now, on the day of Rachel's wedding, she had decided to show up. Rach, Samantha called out softly, her voice laced with hesitation. I wanted to apologize. I know this probably isn't the time, but I couldn't stay away. I've been thinking about everything. How we grew up, how I treated you. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Rachel's emotions were a whirlwind. Anger, resentment, confusion. They all swirled inside her. But she stood her ground. Samantha, she began, her voice steady but firm. Do you think one apology can fix everything? Do you think after all these years, you can just waltz in and act like nothing happened? Samantha's face softened. No, I know I can't. I've been terrible, and I don't expect you to forgive me just like that. But I'm here. I want to try, Rachel. I want to be better for you. For us. Rachel looked at Luke, who gave her a reassuring smile. Rachel felt the years of resentment, the pain, the anger, all of it pressed down on her. She wasn't sure if forgiveness was possible, but in this moment, she realized something important. She didn't have to fix everything. She didn't have to let her family's issues define her anymore. The choice. As Rachel looked at Samantha, something inside her shifted. The pain of the past would always be there, but so would the possibility of healing. And for the first time, Rachel felt ready to choose her own future, regardless of what her family had or hadn't done. I'm glad you're here, Rachel said, her voice softer now. But this is my day, my life. I've spent too many years letting you and Mom and Dad control how I see myself. I'm done with that. Samantha nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I understand, Rach. I really do. And I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm here. If you ever need me, I'll be there. Rachel stood silently for a moment, weighing her options. And then, with a deep breath, she finally spoke. Maybe we can start fresh, but on my terms. No more pretending, no more lies. Samantha nodded again, smiling weakly. I can live with that. Rachel had spent weeks leading up to the wedding in a whirlwind of activity, finalizing the guest list, adjusting last-minute details, and attempting to keep the peace between the conflicting emotions that had taken root in her heart. But nothing had prepared her for the moment when she finally hit send on the message to her parents and Samantha, inviting them to the wedding. The simple text had sat in her drafts for days, as if waiting for the right moment to be sent, but that moment never seemed to come. What if they didn't respond? What if they didn't care enough to show up? But Rachel had made a decision. She had to do it, not for them, but for herself. She needed to stop living in the shadow of what her family thought of her, and in doing so, she could move forward with her own life. The days after sending the invitation passed in a blur of anticipation and dread. Each time Rachel checked her phone, she half expected a message, a call, something. But all she received were the congratulatory messages from friends, her coworkers, and the occasional reminder from her grandparents about how beautiful the ceremony was going to be. It seemed that everything was coming together perfectly, except for the one thing that still mattered to Rachel: her family. Luke had been supportive, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. They spent their nights together, planning the future, discussing their hopes and dreams. But even as they enjoyed the moments of peace, Rachel couldn't escape the underlying tension that gripped her when she thought about her parents. The phone call. It was a week before the wedding when Rachel received the call. She had just stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around herself, when her phone buzzed on the counter. The name on the screen made her heart stop. Dad. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the phone as if it were a foreign object. She hadn't spoken to her father in months, and when they did speak, it was always short, transactional, never warm, never loving. But now, he was calling. Rachel hesitated, then picked up the phone, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Hello? There was a long pause before her father's voice came through the line, sounding strangely tired. Rachel, it's your dad. I just wanted to talk about your wedding. Her heart skipped a beat. The emotions she had been trying to suppress for so long began to surface. I've been waiting for your response, she said, trying to keep her voice even. I invited you to the wedding. You didn't respond. I didn't know what to think. Another pause. Rachel could hear him shifting in his chair. We got your invitation, and we've been talking about it, but there's something we need to discuss first. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? Her father sighed. Your sister's birthday party is the same weekend as your wedding. Samantha, she's been planning this for months, and we promised her that we would be there. It's important to her. Rachel's blood ran cold. She had heard the tone of his voice. He was making a choice. The implication was clear. Her sister's birthday party, yet again, had taken precedence over Rachel's wedding. It was the same pattern, the same disregard for her, that had been there her entire life. Rachel clenched her fist, trying to control the anger bubbling up inside her. You're choosing her party over my wedding? She asked, her voice cracking slightly, despite her best efforts. We're not choosing her over you, Rachel, her father responded, his tone defensive. But you know how much Samantha needs us. She's been through a lot lately, and this is important to her. Rachel's head felt like it was spinning. And what about me? What about this wedding, Dad? Do I not matter? I've spent years trying to get your approval, trying to be enough for you, and yet every single time, it's Samantha who gets everything. Her father's voice grew quieter, almost softer, but there was no apology. I'm sorry you feel that way, Rachel, but you've always been strong. You'll be fine. The words stung deeper than anything he had ever said. He wasn't sorry, not really. Not for the years of neglect. Not for the way he had always placed Samantha above her. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about a lifetime of being second. You know what? I don't need your approval anymore, Dad, Rachel said, her voice rising with emotion. You've made your choice, and I'm done trying to get you to care. I'm getting married, I'm moving on, and you're not a part of it. She didn't wait for a response before hanging up the phone. Her chest heaved with the weight of everything she had been holding in for so long. The years of disappointment. The years of trying to prove herself to people who would never see her worth. It was all too much. Rachel's eyes welled with tears as she dropped the phone on the couch. She had expected this, hadn't she? She had known that her family would never be there for her in the way she wanted. She had built a life without them, but this still hurt. Luke entered the room just as Rachel was wiping away a tear. He had heard the conversation, and he had seen the change in her face, the shift in her energy. He walked over to her, sitting down beside her, his hand gently rubbing her back. "Hey," he said softly, his voice filled with concern. "What happened?" Rachel wiped her eyes, forcing a smile as she looked at him. They're not coming. My dad just called, and they're going to Samantha's birthday party instead of my wedding." Luke sighed, his own anger flickering in his eyes, but he didn't let it show. He knew this was hard for Rachel. "I'm sorry, babe. I know how much you wanted them to be there." "I don't even know why it still matters," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "It's been this way my whole life. They've never really seen me. They've always put Samantha first, and I've just been waiting for them to care." Luke pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You don't need them, Rachel. You never have. You've built a life full of love, full of people who truly care about you. And I'm one of them." Rachel rested her head on his shoulder, trying to calm her racing heart. I know you're right, but it still hurts. It's just hard to let go of the hope that maybe one day they would finally choose me." Luke gently cupped her face, lifting her chin so she could meet his gaze. "Let go of them, Rachel. It's time. You've done everything for them, and now it's time to do everything for you." Rachel nodded, taking a deep breath. For the first time, she truly felt that maybe it was time to let go. She had spent so many years waiting for something that would never come. Her family might never change, but she had the power to move forward. And with Luke by her side, maybe she could finally let go of the past and embrace the future they would build together. The decision. Rachel walked over to the large window in their apartment, staring out at the city below. It was late, but the lights of Austin were still twinkling, a reminder that life kept moving, no matter what. She had always been afraid of moving forward without her family's approval, but now she realized something important. She had already moved forward. She didn't need them to validate her worth. She had Luke, she had her grandparents, and she had friends who truly cared about her. That was enough. She picked up her phone and dialed her father's number again. This time, she didn't wait for him to answer. She left a voicemail, her voice clear and steady. "Dad, I've made my decision. I'm moving on. I'm marrying Luke, and we're starting our life together. I don't need your approval anymore. I've waited too long for you to see me, and I'm done waiting. Goodbye." Rachel hung up the phone, her chest lighter than it had been in years. She had said what needed to be said. It was time to let go. Rachel stood on the balcony of their new apartment, gazing out at the city skyline. The sun was just beginning to set, casting an orange glow across the horizon, the sky fading into twilight. She had always loved this time of day, the calm before the storm, the quiet moments that made everything feel possible. But now, she couldn't escape the storm brewing in her own heart. It had been a week since she had spoken to her father, and a part of her still wondered if she had made the right choice. Would she regret cutting ties with them? Could she ever truly move on without their acceptance? Luke walked up behind her, his presence familiar and comforting. "Hey," he said softly, his voice a warm contrast to the cool evening air. "You're thinking again, huh?" Rachel nodded, a small bittersweet smile on her lips. "I can't help it. I keep wondering if I did the right thing, you know? They're my family. I've spent my whole life trying to gain their approval, and now I'm just walking away." Luke stepped beside her, leaning against the railing. "You're not walking away, Rachel. You're stepping into your own life. You've been carrying their weight for far too long. You deserve peace. And you've got that now. You've made the decision that's best for you, and that's all that matters. Rachel turned to him, searching his face for any hint of doubt, but found none. His support, his unwavering belief in her, grounded her. He was the one constant in her life now, the one person who had never made her feel second best. He had chosen her, and for the first time, she had chosen herself. "I don't think I could have made it this far without you," Rachel admitted, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. Luke smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "And you don't have to. I'm here every step of the way, always." A conversation with her grandparents. That evening, Rachel and Luke sat down with her grandparents, Henry and June, over dinner. Her grandparents had always been there for her. Since she was a child, they had provided the love and support her parents never had. Their home in Waco had been a sanctuary for Rachel during the difficult years, and now, they were the ones who celebrated her new life with Luke. Rachel had always loved their small home in Waco. The smell of fresh-baked bread in the air, the creak of the wooden floors, the way Henry would sit on the porch and tell stories about the past. It was their steady presence that had kept her grounded during the hardest moments of her life. After they had finished dinner, June cleared the table, and Henry leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Rachel, we've been meaning to ask you," he said, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. "How are you really feeling? I know you've been through a lot with your parents, and we're so proud of the woman you've become. But I also know you've been carrying a heavy burden. How are you really holding up?" Rachel hesitated for a moment, her gaze falling to her hands. She had always been able to talk to her grandparents about anything, but now, the weight of her emotions felt heavier than ever. She didn't want to admit how hard it had been, how much the pain of being rejected by her family still lingered, even though she had made the decision to move on. "I feel conflicted," Rachel admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I've spent so many years trying to earn their love, trying to be what they wanted me to be. And now I'm not sure if I can ever really let go of the hope that maybe they'll come around. Maybe they'll finally see me." Henry nodded thoughtfully, his wise eyes studying her, with a depth that always made Rachel feel understood. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting, Rachel. It means accepting that you can't change the past. You've been holding on to something that's been weighing you down for far too long. It's time to put that weight down and walk forward with the people who love you for who you are, not for who you could be." So, June, who had been listening quietly, added softly, "Your parents may never change, sweetheart, but you have to believe that you are enough, just as you are. You've done everything you could, and now it's time to live for yourself." Rachel's throat tightened as she listened to her grandparents' words. She had heard them say similar things before, but this time, it felt different. They were right. She had done everything she could for her family. It was time to stop waiting for them to validate her. She was worthy of love, of happiness, of a future filled with people who truly cared for her. And those people were standing right in front of her. "I'm ready," Rachel said, her voice firm. "I'm ready to move on." Luke reached over, taking her hand in his, giving her a gentle squeeze. His eyes were filled with pride. "I'm proud of you, Rachel. You've come a long way." The phone call to Samantha, a few days later, Rachel found herself sitting in the living room of their apartment, her phone in hand. She had thought about this moment for a long time, and now, it was time to make the call. The one person who had caused her the most pain, the one person who had always been the center of attention, the golden child, was Samantha. Rachel had spent so many years resenting her, feeling invisible in her sister's shadow, but now, she realized that holding on to that resentment wasn't serving her anymore. Taking a deep breath, Rachel dialed her sister's number. The phone rang several times before Samantha picked up. "Rachel?" Samantha's voice sounded surprised but warm. "Is everything okay?" Rachel hesitated, her heart beating faster. She could feel the tension rising in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been dreading and longing for all at once. "I wanted to talk to you, Sam," Rachel said, her voice steady but vulnerable. "I've been thinking about everything, about us. And I think it's time for us to really try to start fresh. I don't want to keep holding on to the past, but I need to know that you're willing to meet me halfway." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I've been thinking about this too," Samantha finally replied, her voice softer now. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Rachel. I'm sorry for everything. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. I know I've hurt you, and I regret that every day." Rachel swallowed, the flood of emotions she had been holding back rushing to the surface. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Sam, but I'm willing to try. I want to have a relationship with you, but it's going to take time. It's going to take effort from both of us." "I understand," Samantha said quietly, "and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I always will be." Rachel closed her eyes, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but for the first time in years, she felt like there was hope. Hope for a new beginning. Hope for healing. The wedding day. The morning of the wedding arrived in a flurry of activity. Rachel stood in front of the mirror in her bridal suite, taking one last look at herself before the ceremony began. She was no longer the girl who had been defined by her family's rejection. She was a woman who had built her own life, one filled with love and support. As she walked down the aisle, her grandparents watching from the front row, Rachel felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was the beginning of something new, something that was hers and Luke's. When Luke met her at the altar, their eyes locked, and Rachel knew this was where she was meant to be. Not in the shadows of her family, but in the light of her own love. The weeks following the wedding passed in a blur. The honeymoon had been everything Rachel and Luke had hoped for. A quiet, serene escape from the pressures of everyday life. They spent their days exploring the countryside, hiking through lush forests, and sitting by a quiet lake, basking in the peaceful silence that only came when two souls truly understood each other. But now, as Rachel stood in the kitchen of their new home, staring at the ingredients for dinner, a new sense of reality settled in. Life had returned to its usual rhythm, but something inside her felt different. The weight she had carried for years, the need for approval from her family, the sense of being overlooked, was gone. But it left behind a strange sense of emptiness. Rachel had spent so many years defining herself by her family's acceptance, and now, she was no longer that person. The past few months had been transformative, but Rachel was beginning to realize that transformation wasn't as simple as it seemed. Luke entered the kitchen, his footsteps light, a smile on his face as he approached her from behind. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to her cheek. "Hey, how's my beautiful wife doing?" Rachel smiled, leaning into his embrace, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice was tinged with something that Luke instantly recognized. "You don't sound okay," he replied softly. "What's on your mind?" Rachel turned in his arms to face him, her hands resting on his chest. "I don't know," she said, her voice quiet. "I thought everything would be different, you know? I thought after everything with my family, I would feel free. But it's like there's this part of me that's still waiting for them to care, still waiting for something that will never come." Luke nodded, his eyes filled with empathy. "It's a big change, Rachel. I can only imagine how hard it must be to let go of something you've held on to for so long. But you've done it. You've freed yourself from that weight. And you have me now. You have a life that's yours, not defined by anyone else." Rachel took a deep breath, feeling his words sink into her heart. He was right. She had freed herself, but the feeling of emptiness, the lingering echo of the past, was something she hadn't fully understood until now. It wasn't about letting go of her family's approval. It was about learning how to live without their expectations. "I know," Rachel said, her voice steadier now. "It's just hard. I spent so many years hoping for something that would never happen. I thought, if I achieved enough, if I worked hard enough, they'd notice me. But they never did." Luke's hands gently cupped her face, lifting her chin so she could look into his eyes. You've spent so many years defining yourself by their expectations, but now, you get to define yourself by what you want. What we want. Rachel smiled softly, her heart swelling with love for the man standing before her. I'm lucky to have you. You're not lucky, Rach, Luke replied, his voice full of certainty. You're worthy. You've always been worthy. The call from Samantha Rachel was still lost in thought when her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up, surprised to see Samantha's name flashing on the screen. It had been weeks since the wedding, and the last conversation they had left Rachel with mixed emotions. She had been unsure whether Samantha was truly remorseful, or if it was just another fleeting moment of guilt. Rachel answered the call, her heart racing as she brought the phone to her ear. Hello? Sis. Samantha's voice was hesitant, but there was something genuine in it this time. Can we talk? Rachel sighed, a wave of emotions washing over her. What about? I need to say more. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about what we both said. I didn't realize how much I had hurt you, and I've been really selfish. Rachel leaned against the counter, her free hand tracing the edge of the countertop. Samantha, I don't know what you want from me anymore. You've said you're sorry, but actions speak louder than words. I know, I've been a bad sister, and I can't change the past. But I want to try, Rachel. I really do. I know it's going to take time, but I want to be there for you, for us. Rachel's heart twisted. She hadn't realized just how much she had longed for Samantha to make an effort, to step up and show her that she wasn't just the shadow in their family's eyes. She had always believed that if she proved herself enough, her sister might see her for who she was. But now, that desire felt unnecessary. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. Sam, Rachel began, her voice trembling slightly. I'm not asking you to fix everything. I'm not even asking for an apology. But I need to know that you're going to be there for me when I need you, not when it's convenient for you. Samantha was silent for a moment before she spoke again, her voice softer now. I promise, I'm here, Rachel. I want to be the sister I should have been all along, but I need you to give me a chance. Rachel closed her eyes, the weight of her sister's words settling deep in her chest. She wasn't ready to forgive her completely, but something in Samantha's voice told her that she might just be ready to try. She wasn't sure what the future held for them, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to take a step toward healing. I'll give you that chance, Rachel said softly, but you have to prove it. You have to show me that you can be there for me, not just when you feel guilty, but when it really matters. I will, Samantha replied, her voice full of sincerity. I swear. A family reborn. The next few months were a period of growth for Rachel. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the shadows of her past crept in, when she doubted herself and questioned whether she had made the right choices. But with Luke's constant support and her newfound sense of independence, Rachel found herself standing taller each day. Her family, for all its flaws, was a part of her past, but she no longer allowed it to define her. Rachel and Samantha began to reconnect slowly, cautiously, but it was a start. They had lunch together a few times, talking about everything and nothing, just two sisters trying to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't perfect, and there were still awkward moments, but there was a new understanding between them. Samantha had made an effort, and Rachel could see it. One day, when they were sitting at a cafe, Samantha turned to her with a small, shy smile. I know I can't make up for everything I've done, but I'm really glad we're doing this, Rachel. Rachel smiled back, the weight in her chest easing just a little. Me too. The new chapter. Rachel had come a long way from the woman who had once desperately sought validation from her family. She no longer defined herself by their rejection. She had created her own path, and now she was walking it with Luke by her side. They had bought a small house in the suburbs of Austin, a place that was truly theirs. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their new home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Rachel felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had built a life filled with love, acceptance, and understanding. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer controlled her. Luke took her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. "This is it," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet contentment. "This is our beginning." Rachel nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, "our beginning." If you've enjoyed Rachel's journey and want to hear more emotional stories of love, growth, and overcoming the challenges life throws at us, make sure to hit that subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll be the first to hear our upcoming stories that will tug at your heartstrings and inspire you to keep pushing forward. Don't miss out on these powerful, real-life experiences that could change the way you see the world. Join our community and let's continue this journey together. Subscribe now and stay tuned for the next chapter of Heartfelt Tales.